We need to meet people where they're at. And nobody wants to listen to somebody that's not speaking their language. And so that starts with validation, and that forms a bridge between people. And that is where we connect, is by showing understanding of somebody else's point of view. Welcome to today's episode of What to Say and How to Say It. Today, we're going to talk about how to have a better outcome in a conflict situation. Now, it doesn't matter if you're at work or at home or at church. Conflict is going to mess you up if you don't learn how to deal with it. And as a matter of fact, the things that you're doing may actually be making it worse. So if you have conflict and you're avoiding it, you're making things worse, because you're teaching people that it's okay to do whatever it is that they're doing. And you're just going to build up resentment, which then makes everything worse. And then there's unforgiveness. And it's just a huge problem, right? So what do? Well, we need to have the skills, absolutely. But on top of that, we also need to know that there's some things that really need to happen for us to be good at it. So we're going to talk about how to have better outcomes today. And I'm going to give you 3 things that you can actually do to have these better outcomes. Okay. So it was probably about 12 years ago. And it was my first time being exposed to listening and healing prayer. Okay. I'd never heard of this. And I was sitting in a room with somebody who was going through it. And I had this question about, ask about the bicycle. And I felt really awkward, but I did it. And it turned out opening up a bunch of doors. There was lies that were revealed. There was a wound. I mean, it was just really cool to watch. So I had some things in my life, that I was aware of that were keeping me kind of stuck. And so I went and I sought some people out that did this. And it was just about the time that I was moving into raising teenagers. All right. So it was incredible. We dealt with rejection and accusations and word curses that were spoken over me, just all this stuff, right? I spent probably a good 15 hours, 15 to 30 hours over the course of 2 years going through this really intense time of prayer. And since then, I've morphed into somebody that can do this 2 or 3 times a week with the Lord. And if I get stuck, I recruit one of my staff people to help me with it, because we know how to help people get through this stuff. But anyway, the point number 1 is deal with your wounds, because they get in the way. What am I saying by that? So when you're in a conflict situation, everything's going fine as long as you're not triggered, as long as you don't have any blood pressure rising, as long as you're not getting emotional, as long as, the other person's not, you're just having a discussion where you have a difference of opinion. Nobody's really attached to it, and you navigate it just fine. Okay. It's when we have wounding, or when we believe a lie, like this person doesn't love me, they're just trying to take advantage of me. I don't know, the always and the nevers and whatevers, those show up in those spaces. And we know it's happening because we feel it physically. And we have a deep urge to interrupt, right? We want to get our words out. We want to say what we need to say, or what we think we need to say, because they're wrong. This other person's wrong, and we need to explain ourselves. This is absolutely the worst thing that you can do. Don't do that. You're not in a debate. You might think you are. It might feel like it. But the enemy has created situation because of stuff you believed as a kid that was in alignment with what he wanted you to believe. So now you're on the defense because you're operating out of this. You're not in alignment with God. Yeah, I did actually say that. You're not in alignment with God. You're in alignment with the enemy. So he has a legal right to mess with you. And so by dealing with your wounds through a listening and healing prayer experience, and I don't care whether it's, Neil Anderson or I think it's Lee Smith, or, theophostic stuff, Rusty Rustenbach, Derek Prince, all those, Marcus Warner. I mean, there's a lot of people that do this, and we've kind of combined those things and some stuff that the Lord has given me over the years we have a prayer process that we walk people through. and they get freedom. And Christ came to set the captives free. And so when we believe the truth, the truth then sets us free, right? So he is the way, the truth, and the life. And so when we step into that willingly, eagerly, then we're able to get this. We're able to be in a place where we disagree with somebody, where we have a difference of opinion that could turn into a conflict, but we're not triggered because we've received God's love in that space. We've been healed. We can see what's true. We can hear the Holy Spirit, because you cannot hear the Holy Spirit when you're filled with cortisol and you're flooded. So anytime you're having those emotions, and they're normal, we're humans, we're going to do this, but anytime you're doing that, instead of blaming the other person, you need to be fully present in your now and understand that that's a cue, that the Lord has something to work with in you about a wounding or a lie you believe. So that's the first thing, is deal with your own emotions. The second thing is listen. So yeah, the dealing with your own emotions thing takes a while. But even if you're not healed, you can just have a rule for yourself, which we encourage everybody in our ground rules that we do with couples. We say, don't ever do conflict when you're emotional. Don't say words when you're emotional. Just listen or walk away, right? And so you can white knuckle the listening part, right? Which means you stay present, you let the other person say what they're saying, and nonverbal. You give them a head nod, you engage with what they're experiencing just by listening to it. And it might be hard. If it's hard, you know that you have an opportunity for healing. So you can go back to point one, right? And you don't do it right then, obviously. One of the big things about conflict is people think, I need to solve this now. And at work, yeah, there's stuff that's got to happen, but most of the time we can still wait a while, even if it's just half an hour, and we come back to it. So we ask people to insert space, to listen, and then insert space if they're emotional. And then they go work the thing out with the Lord or with their coach or whatever it is, right? But that's the first thing, is to listen. And good listeners ask questions. What do you mean by that? Can you tell me more about this? Why is that important to you? And ladies, I want to encourage you not to use the word why with men. Research done by Shanti Feldhahn in her book, The Male Factor, reveals to us that men on average perceive the word why as a challenge. And so you don't want to put someone on the defensive by saying, well, why did you do this? Because what we're basically doing when we do that is challenging their intelligence at making the decision that they've made. Women generally don't do this. Women like to explain, and women like to hear each other's explanations sometimes, as long as they're not in the middle of a conflict, because then that's defensive behavior, and that ramps the energy up, and you get this stupid spiral going. And somebody needs to put a stop to it. The most mature person in the dialogue needs to put a stop to it. So let that be you, right? Let the Jesus in you step forth and do no more damage to the relationship by continuing it. The third thing, and this, you cannot do this unless you're healed. I've been at this a long time, 30 years coaching communicators. And I am telling you, you can white knuckle it, but if you're close to this person, and you can get away with this at work a lot of times, unless you've been around for a long time and people know little idiosyncrasies. There's research on micro expressions. So you can flash something like contempt or anger, and people will interpret that even if it just flashes on your face for a quarter of a second. And that occurs when we're white knuckling. I'm going to choose to be patient here. I'm going to choose to be kind. I hate what they're saying. And that sure shows up. I mean, you're not fooling anybody if they really know you deeply. So have that awareness, know that, and get healing in that space. Because if you're triggered, if you're having those emotions, and note that I'm not justifying what the other person did. Their actions are actually evidence of where they're wounded. That's evidence of lies that they believe. Even if they're throwing it at you, it's usually a projection of what they think about themselves. So yeah, be thinking about that as you listen to all of that. If you are triggered by it, go work it with God, because the last one, again, point 3, is to validate. And validation is not agreement, but we cannot validate people in a space where we don't have healing ourselves. So what this looks like is, oh gosh, yeah, that would be really hard. It looks like agreeing with whatever you can agree with. Yeah, that sounds difficult for you. Yeah, you know what? It is. This report is wrong. This, you know what? It is late. You're absolutely right. Whatever you can agree with, this must be frustrating for you. It sounds like you were really looking forward to having this done, and it didn't happen. That's got to be a challenge for you. And that's rough. Oh, really? Oh, really? Oh, man. Don't do this with men. Don't voice over them. Wait for them to pause and then speak. Because with men, and again, this comes from Shanti Feldhahn's book, The Male Factor, and there's other research around this too, by the way. The research shows that when you interrupt men, and women speak over each other all the time, we participate in conversation, and men don't do that. When you speak over a man, even if it's in a supportive, agreeable kind of way, a lot of men on average, and again, this is just on average, so don't feel judged, guys, but on average, they'll perceive that as an attempt at control. And this is how things work in the boardroom. So just have that awareness, ladies. We need to fit our communication style to our audience. I've been a public speaking coach for 3 decades. That's a long time to do anything, right? But it's always about reaching your audience. And so you meet them where they're at. I had a professor I worked for her at the college where I was teaching communication. And one of my students actually went and complained about me because I was teaching people how to communicate based on their audience, that we should tailor our communication to who our audience was and have their demographic in mind when we were speaking to them. And that meant that we had an awareness of the gender of the audience, an awareness of the religious affiliation, an awareness of the age, awareness of, were they family people, were they professional people, know your audience, right? And she was of the opinion that I was telling people that you should not do that because she felt it was demeaning to the speaker. And I love what my boss said. She was a African-American woman. And she said to her, here's the deal. If I go into a meeting here at the college and I speak Ebonics, which I do, I'm going to not be understood. And I'm going to be viewed as unprofessional, because you know what? It is. And I thought that was really interesting. We need to speak the language of the people we're with. And whether we like it or not, there are some differences, and they're based on age and gender and sometimes demographic, that we need to keep those things in mind. So I tend to get frustrated with some of my kids who speak over my head, with I've got a kid that is a EMT, and he's going to med school, right? He's in that process, and he'll say things and talk about vascular XYZ in these huge words. And I'll look at him and I'm like, I'm not a med student. Can you speak it in a language that I'll understand? He'll be like, oh yeah, that big tube that carries the blood from the XY, and not that simple, guys, but that's the example I have for you right now. Anyway, the point is that we need to meet people where they're at. And nobody wants to listen to somebody that's not speaking their language. And so that starts with validation, and that forms a bridge between people. And that is where we connect, is by showing understanding of somebody else's point of view. And we can't do that. We can't do that when we're flooded. You can have all the communication skills in the world. You do not have access to them in your brain. Even if your parents modeled this stuff, you don't have access to it because of the flooding and the cortisol. It interferes with our ability to hear God. It interferes with our ability to love well. And because perfect love casts out all fear, we need to receive God's love in those broken places within us. And there's a lot of ways to do that. So, so I just want to encourage you, if you do put space into a dialogue, because somebody's getting emotional and you want to protect the relationship, you got to come back to it. So that's another thing. Just make sure you return to that conversation. So again, 3 things today: deal with your own woundings and lies you believe, and then listen to the other person and validate them. And if you can't do those things, get some help with that first one over and over and over again. Be hungry after the Lord's work in setting the captives free and healing the brokenhearted. And you will also become a better listener and relationship deepener, if you will. And you'll have greater, deeper connections with other people as a result of that. So anyway, hope this was helpful today. And we'll see you on our website at greaterimpact.org.